Welcome to Sunday Sessions, hosted by Vibe Unit. If this is your first time hearing about Vibe Unit, let me tell you about us. We are a collection of musicians and artists from the area. We get together right here every Sunday and do something called a Sunday Stream. The Sunday Stream is just us riffing, hanging out, making music together. If you'd like to be a part of something like this or on a Sunday Stream or want to know more about Vibe Unit, we do have a website, vibeunit.com. You can check us out there, and you can email us at media@vibeunit.com. So that's a great way to get a hold of us. You can find out also on there. You can support us in different ways. We have YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. Follow us, subscribe to all the things that come along with that. And also, if you are able to support us in other ways, in the cash way, we do accept donations. We have a Cash App and a Patreon, and all that is greatly appreciated. We've definitely been able to make some great improvements because of the donations from people who have participated and people who just appreciate what we're doing. Great episode again today. A little bit different. As you can see, we started over here on this side of the room. We're just going to talk a little bit. It's Halloween weekend, so I imagine everyone's pretty busy this weekend. Doing Halloween parties. I'm sure everyone was up late last night. But this is session 95, and we're excited. Just John and I here talking. So, how you doing, John? What's up?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm really tired. I had a very tiring weekend so far, and it's not over yet. So, I'm hanging in there. How about you?
Yeah, not too bad. I celebrated my birthday yesterday.
Absolutely.
So I'm 31 years old. Thank you very much.
Happy birthday.
Thank you, Ashley. Yeah, it was a good party, and Ashley bought me a couple books I've just been, getting into and learning about the history of video games and chiptune and music-related technology. So it's been really, really cool. Like yesterday, I was just reading while everyone was at my party.
Yes, he was.
In the corner of the room, curled up on the couch, just reading my book I just got.
Like no one else was there.
Yeah. The noise, all the talking just became noise, and it didn't matter.
I've been there before, man. It's just like, this is more compelling than whatever's going on. And it's not an insult to anybody or anything.
I
it's
like
just
the
like,
people there.
I'm that interested in this thing that I just want to consume whatever this is.
Yeah.
That's all I'm interested in.
Well,
at
isn't that the
moment.
test of something that actually warrants your attention? Because if you can handle getting like all the noise and distractions, but you're still focused on reading, like you must really care about that material.
Yeah.
I don't usually get that into to reading like that. I'd have to. Everything's got to be quiet and whatever. But this was so fascinating to me. I was just.
Well, nowadays I found the secret is you just got to have a nice collection of PDFs on your phone. That way you can just do what everyone else does, where you just stand around and stare at your phone, but you're reading like a 200-page manual to like a the microKorg or something stupid.
People assume you're on social media, but you're just reading PDFs for synthesizers. It's awesome.
It's all right.
Taylor says happy belated.
Hey, thanks, Taylor. Appreciate you.
That's cool. Yeah, it's like you said, that's the test of how passionate you are about something. It just peels you away from every other thing. And synthesis is fascinating. I mean, it's
an endless well of
I was
knowledge.
just thumbing through. Where are those books actually?
Oh, I'll grab one. Well, actually, they're in my bag, Ash. Could you bring those out to us?
There was the one that you just put in my hands. I was.
Yeah, that's the larger flat one. Well, if you're into synthesis out there, you might have heard of this book. It's pretty popular.
So this was the first book that I was just thumbing through a second ago. This is Welsh's Synthesizer Cookbook. Fred Welsh is the author.
Kind of an older book now. It was written, or I think finished in 2005. They've had a couple like new editions, revisions, but it doesn't cover much of the new synthesis. Mostly just additive and subtractive synthesis.
So yeah, the basic concept of this is trying to go down to like the building blocks of actual sound waves, the waveforms themselves, and how, their interactions and combinations basically can create any other sound or approximate.
Yeah, approximate.
But
you
so
can
that's
get
very interesting.
You can get pretty close, and he even explains even further. He talks about how all waves, sound waves, and all sounds you hear, I should say, are comprised of multiple sine waves all interacting with each other at different frequencies and harmonics to create what we hear as voices or pianos or whatever. It's quite fascinating. I looked at it when I was trying to explain this to my dad yesterday. I said it's kind of like all matter has atoms and all sound has sine waves in a sense. Like you break it down to its fundamental pieces, and it's like, and they call them partials in the sound wave community, or in synthesis.
Interesting.
But
yeah,
and then this one was really.
This one is like looks like it's diving deep into like a little bit of both sides, like the hardware and a little bit of the programming.
Yep.
Sensibilities required to create the kinds of sounds that were part of some of the.
Yeah, this one bits and pieces. So this book I just started. The other one was a short read, but this one here, Kenneth B. How do you say it? McAlpine?
McAlpine, yeah.
McAlpine. So if you look on the back, I guess Imogen Heap, if that's how you say her name, she actually read the book and did a little review about it. I thought that was pretty cool. And then so this book, it goes back into the history of like video games and traces through like, the old computers that used to make games and how people, like Chiptune is the main subject of it. And it goes through the history of like early computers and their limited ability to make music and how people would push the hardware. And that actually, not a lot of people know this if they're not into music or that kind of thing, but are into video games. They might not have even thought of this, but sound design was being pushed just as hard as like graphic design and video. They were trying to create atmosphere and immersive experience, and the music had a huge part of that.
Right. Well, and you could also argue that given the limited resources of the hardware at the time as well, in the same way that when, the new PlayStation drops and, whatever the AAA exclusive title that comes out for it, is always supposed to be the one that looks the best and is like pushing the limits, of whatever that can do at that time.
Right.
I see a lot of that in some of the sound-related programming in some of those older stuff too, because it's like, look, there's fixed clock cycles. Like, we're at the end, after doing all of these other things we need to do to bolt together a functioning game. It's like at the end, it's like, all right, buddy, you get 10 cycles or whatever to generate a waveform.
Yep.
Or something, something that and so people were trying to see like how much could you get away with even with the limitation.
Right.
And it's just interesting. You were talking earlier about like the idea of having limited, think of it as like limited channels of playback, and having to decide like effectively like a hierarchy of what's more important than something else, because if it turns out that they play at the same time, they can't both play.
Yeah.
So what gets shaved?
Yep, exactly.
And that's also one of the reasons I think that like I find I love those Sega based things for the same reason, because there's only one channel of real sample playback. So you can't just do sampled instruments for everything. It's like you have to decide like what thing actually benefits from that.
Right.
And in some cases they couldn't use it at all because they needed it for like effects or like a real thing that was game related. So, but then there's other things where it wasn't needed for that thing all the time, and so it could be exploited for other things. Like, for example,
like speech.
I wish I could think of the game it's from, but there's a good example of that where they use like the PCM channel for both doing like beefing out the snare hits that normally would just be FM, and also beefing out like the sound of like a distorted guitar.
Yeah.
By exploiting like the noise, like the noisiness of that, and then blending it with some.
That's
synth.
cool.
And it's just really neat because it's like you wouldn't have done that if they said, "Oh, here you go. Here's 8 channels of just playback."
Well, that's part of the whole. It's in the lifeblood of chiptune music is working within the limitations. Like that is huge in the lifeblood. Like how far can we push this little bit of space we have to work in? I've always been fascinated with that. The minimal, like
in a way,
using
like
the least amount of resources.
That's kind of true of anything that's pioneering, though, right? I mean, the same could be said of like early 4-track recordings, say.
Yeah.
Yeah,
like
this
how
is
they
the limitation of the medium. So, what can you do with it? And then people discover things like, well, we could just leave a track free and just start bouncing.
Yep.
What we think of as that now, we'll just cut the tape and we'll play the other 3 tracks to the 4th track which will free up 3 more. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
You can just keep stacking. And
What-
there's like people that had their entire start, like people that are, famous musicians that started in a bedroom on a terrible 4-track. But, the point is that teaches you, like you said, the sensibilities of deciding what's important enough. Is it worth redoing, for example, if you make a mistake? Well, I don't know. How important is it? It just changes the whole way you approach things.
Seth says Anamanaguchi is a great chiptune band.
Yeah, okay. They're referenced in this book, by the way.
The page I literally opened when I was like just flipping through it a second ago, I literally saw that.
And if you like that group, I'd also I know you personally, so I can say at the age you're at, there's no way you escape from the band Ozma. You should check them out. You probably already know them, but they were referenced in this book as well because they were covering video game music with a punk rock band.
Interesting.
So there's like it'll get into that, but Anamanaguchi is where I'd say like popular culture and chiptune like really intersect because they made the music for the video game Scott Pilgrim versus the World. And they also wrote a lot of the music for later on came a movie out of that. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen that.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that movie, which I actually haven't seen, I've just heard of, the movie's based on a game?
Yeah.
I really would have assumed it'd be the other way around. That's really funny.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's the thing I learned today.
So
Seth says, Ozma is amazing.
yeah, absolutely incredible. They had an album they released called the Double Donkey Disc or something like that, and that's where they did a cover of Tetris.
Okay.
That da da na 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 na, and then and a lot of people music that is influenced by video games and also these bands that cover music and like Anamanaguchi. They sometimes, especially ones from the 90s, they'll call them nerdcore bands because they would implement a lot of video game culture into their music, and then they also implement, or they also might, like in Anamanaguchi's case, they write chiptune music, and then they play real instruments with it.
Right, okay.
And that becomes the tracker becomes a member of the band, in a sense, which I think that's my like bread and butter favorite thing. Like it's just
I like that.
And Vic, who's been on the stream, him and I were experimenting with writing leads on the tracker and him figuring out the harmony and then realizing we could write compositions where he's riffing as a rhythm guitar player and then it goes into a section where he's actually harmonizing with the tracker. So it's like this beautiful relationship of a human participant with like harmonizing with a computer and just bringing those worlds together.
Right.
In harmony.
That's super neat.
It's fascinating.
There was a song that you had made on the poly end at one point that you had brought over. And I remember like just riffing some guitar
That's
over
right.
it and just having some fun.
You did this too with me. I now that you mentioned that, I do remember that. And that was awesome. I was like, and that's what I want.
It reminds me of like anime soundtrack type stuff because I've noticed I'm currently watching through like an anime with a lot of episodes, and so because of that, it isn't always the same music. Like every so many episodes, they'll swap out, maybe the title track and maybe the outro or whatever. So when you're watching it, normally you probably would skip through that, but like if a different song starts playing, it's like, oh, what is this? And it's interesting because it's always a mixture of different things. It's supposed to be, upbeat. It's supposed to be catchy. It's supposed to, it's supposed to set up what's going on or something and have a certain energy, but yet it tends to be like super solid in terms of theory.
Yeah.
Have very interesting elements going on. Like, I don't know. It's just very interesting.
Yeah. Anime uses a progression. They use like a lot of anime. I actually wrote this down in my chord book that I like to keep track of things, like progressions. They do a 4-5-6 a 4-5-3-6 progression, but they turn the 3 into a major, like instead of it being minor, which is typical. They'll do a major 4, major 5, then a major 3. So there's a borrowed note, which is, and then they'll do a suspend to 6 chord. And it creates this, like, when it does the 3 and it goes to the 6, it has all this buildup in it, and it creates this like anthem sound that you'll hear in a lot of
Exactly.
turnarounds in anime music. It sets you up for this like victory progression almost.
Literally. And,
Yeah.
and I like too because it's generally like a blend of everything from like string sections to synthesizers to drums that they sound like they came off a early 90s Casio keyboard mixed with like actual drummers that kind of shred, and you're like, what is this?
Yeah.
But it's like I said, it's generally like theory-wise very sound and very interesting when I'm listening to it.
This actually loops back to something I read. Okay, so I'm right now in the book. It's not only explaining all the hardware and stuff, but it's doing it in a linear fashion of historical.
So like starting from the oldest or
like the
whatever.
late 70s when they're starting to mess with like the Apple II and doing that kind of stuff. I'm at the point in the late 70s, early 80s where the Atari 2600. And they're talking about how they had to, like, they would write these progressions, but because of the way the tuning of the chip, the microchip that they use for the sound, they had to like make a decision between it being equal tempered scales or what's the other one where it's like the ratios. I don't know. It's something to do with the tuning, right? They found themselves inadvertently getting into the same problem that musicians and sound engineers have had for all time, even all the way back to Bach and Beethoven, where it's like, how do we tune this?
Yeah, how do we make this work with an ensemble? Like the more people we add where their instruments aren't the same fundamentals as everyone else's, how do you synergize?
So because of the limitation of Atari's chip that they're using, which I'll just nickname it to TIA. It was the TIA chip. Because of that TIA chip being limited, some notes, and the way they tuned it, some notes cannot be played at all. Like, for instance, when I play an F on the piano and, like, the fourth octave, it's slightly sharp, and when I play the F sharp, it's slightly flat. And so those notes almost sound identical. They're just a little bit off from each other. There's some notes when they were writing music for the Atari that they couldn't really use as harmony because it created such a nasty dissonance with the other notes. It wasn't tuned correctly. So most progressions for old Atari games, and mind you, the TIA chip only allowed 2 channels of audio at one time. And they're most of the time square waves. There was an exception where they could get noise generation by flipping the ones and zeros in a certain way.
Sure.
But you only had 1 bit of, and if you don't know what I mean by bit, it's for those listening, it means it's either on or off, basically. Like a bit of information in computer. John could probably explain it better than me, but all I know in this case is since you have only 1 bit of computing hardware or memory, you could either turn the signal on or off. There was no like volume in between or whatever in this particular thing. It was either the signal was on or off, and by flipping the zeros and ones in the computer language, you could create different tones, but the only tone that was reliably created was the square wave. So when they were making music for early video games on the TIA chip from the Atari, they realized some notes work, some notes don't, and most of the progressions would be a 1-4-5 progression over and over. So when you go into or when you load up these old games, something that became synonymous with the old video game sound was using a 1-4-5 progression, and that's why old video games always sound so uplifting and happy. And for 2 reasons. One, they want you to feel happy playing it, but the other is that's really all it could do, reliably.
Interesting.
So they were copying old songs. Like most of these kids that made video games, they were 15-year-olds back in the 80s that were just like hobbyists that stumbled upon making their own games. The truth is they wanted to take, like, they go to the arcade and put coins in a machine all day, and they're like, I don't want to spend all my money on this. I want to build my own Pac-Man version at home, and I want to, put my own music and my own stuff in it. So people would make Pac-Man games or versions of Pac-Man, and they would put in any music they could find around the house. Well, most parents who had like a piano and like would teach music lessons or had lessons, they all had sheet music from Beethoven and Bach and stuff laying around. So people would just go and get the sheet music, and they'd program that into the computer to practice writing music into the computer. And that's why a lot of old video games also use old classical music, It's because that's what the
That's
kids.
the source material.
That was the source material that was
at the time.
available, and it was the easiest thing to do. And so some people are like, well, isn't that copyright? And they're like, we were 15 years old. We didn't know what copyright was.
That's all public domain stuff at this point.
Sure. But
which, if anything, turned out to be the genius brain play all along, right? With all of what's happened nowadays with, copyright infringement. and all
So imagine this: you have a complex piece of music from Beethoven, but now you're stuck with only 2 channels of audio at one time. So now you have to make decisions. Do I play the whole chord here? Well, you can't because you only get 2 audio sources at one time. So that's when people started developing ways of playing chords where instead of it playing 5 or let's say the chord is a triad, instead of playing 3 notes at once, well, you only have 2 channels of audio. If you just play 3 notes, you're taking up all the audio. So they had to create like mathematical equations to arpeggiate a note very quickly, and that's what gives you that like ringing, that arpeggiation, really fast arpeggiation sound. That was their attempt of using limited channels to make chords. You
turn everything into a time division problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It's just I'm only in the early '80s right now, and we're in England in the book, and we're learning about the Sinclair, which I think you have some. Feelings towards.
That's always one I've liked in a similar fashion because it has severe limitations, but
very.
Like, for example, one of the channels it has, all it can do is technically make beeps.
Yeah. Yep.
But like,
you can get about 50 millisecond beep or something like that.
Yeah. What happens? But what happens when you like just play them all back to back? Or you just vary the frequency slightly or whatever. Well, now you can generate noise like at an arbitrary pitch, kind of almost.
Yeah.
It's just a square wave because, like you said, all you get is duty
it's
cycle.
either on or off. Yeah,
that's it. But interestingly, can still be exploited for quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I've always enjoyed listening to ZX Spectrum stuff because I think that it was like a ubiquitous enough platform, like enough people had them that, like you said, people that were kind of hobbyists and just playing around with it, a lot of them ended up in people's hands.
Yeah.
So
and they're cheap too. Those old Sinclairs or you said the ZX Spectrum. I don't think I've read about that yet. But
you'll get there.
Yeah,
you'll get there. But they and this is just my understanding of the history, right? Like it could be misinformed.
Yeah,
sure.
Sure.
Someone knows better.
Yeah.
Let me know. But there was enough people like making stuff for it that there was that refinement process that goes around, where like you hear somebody do something, you're like, I could do better than that, right?
Yeah.
But it's funny because you'll listen to certain stuff that, well, let's just say never probably got appreciated for how much it got away with given the limitations because it wasn't attached to some major title or something that people ended up knowing later. I was able to find a bunch of files for that piece of hardware, and I found an emulation platform that someone wrote, and it sounds awesome.
That's awesome.
It's like pretty much perfect. It's, if anything, it's almost too good because all the samples I've ever heard of it before had more noise in them because the output itself was noisy.
Yeah.
And so it's very strange because when you do it like this, it doesn't have that noise. There's noise in the way the synthesis is happening.
Yeah, but you don't get the unnecessary noise that would come from that.
But I'm finding it more interesting because I'm actually able to more closely hear the shaping of the noise, like what was being exploited as like the total package effect as opposed to just like, oh, well, that's what that sound like or whatever. Because you're listening to the whole thing,
Yeah.
So, but those are interesting because the reason I'm looking into some of these low bit depth synthesis techniques is because I'm kind of interested in trying to build a synthesizer, right?
Yeah.
Something very
we've
like
talked about that.
entry level kind of thing because I don't understand a whole lot about it.
Yeah.
But in the last couple of years of playing around with it has taught me at least what are like the building blocks, you know what I mean? Like if you were going to build a car, it's like, well, you don't just need like an engine and a transmission, like, yeah, those are important, but you need other stuff too.
Right.
And so I always had it in mind like, oh, well, I just need something to generate some waveforms. It's like, no, you need that. You need filter,
Yep.
and you need to be able to shape all those things.
Yeah.
You need to be able to do analysis of frequency, and you need to be able to basically manipulate things in a way that is efficient, because you're doing it on some little chip or some, small low-end piece of hardware, basically. So as I get further into it, you start looking for examples of like, well, where was this done well? So like if you discover some simple synthesis technique where you say, I could maybe build something out of that. It's like, well, before just jumping down that rabbit hole, what are some things that used similar techniques? And then you find out about, oh, well, this video game and that keyboard that whatever. And so you start finding examples of those and you go, that's cool, but I don't know if that's the one I'm looking for, right? So at some point, I think I'll find what is the type and thing I'm trying to build, but that's been a real inspiration because that's one of the like kind of my favorites of all time. And a similar one would be like the MOS chip from the Commodores. The Commodore 64 is
that's much later.
The SID sound is just undeniable.
Yeah, that in my emulator that I have, I always find the SID to be the most pleasant to mess with. I have written a few things using that. I have there's this what's true to form in terms of like chiptune. What kind of came up along with it is also this like kind of what you're describing, like this like do it yourself kind of thing, like where you build your own stuff, and that is so close to like the core of chiptune and like the whole entire thing, because this what started out as people trying to replicate video games in arcades quickly led to musician hobbyists exploiting the technology to make their own songs, and then that led to this synonymous thing where people would hack floppy disks, and because they had a little extra space at the boot drive, they would throw in their own calling cards. They'd throw in a little picture, and they'd put a little song in there. That was like their calling card, basically saying, "Hey, if you appreciated the work I put into this, this is who I am. If you get a floppy disk with this stolen game, and you see this calling card on the front end, it was like I did the work, and come to me if you want more or whatever." So along with that, it's like this whole like just almost like Wild West mentality about the whole thing, and that led to like an underground music scene where they exploit technology. There's like these chiptune purists out there that like only use the gear and stuff, but in my searching around for the community of people, I found a website where you can participate in where they do challenges, competitions, where like you make chiptune with limited hardware, you submit it, and then you get voted up or down based on like how efficiently you use the limited tech.
It reminds me of something else. Maybe I don't know if anyone is familiar with, but there's something called the demo scene, which is basically the same kind of thing, but mash that up with more programming, specifically optimization.
We've talked about this, and this fascinates me for the same reason as the music stuff does.
There's various contests that'll be done, and there's been tons of them over the years. So it's one of those things, it's a deep topic you'd have to do research into.
Right.
But the basic thing is the limitation that's imposed typically is a limit as far as what is the your program, this demo. It needs to be executable on whatever platform it's intended for, and there's a limit on how big it can be. And they're usually very small. We're talking like 64K or tiny amounts. So, and then sometimes I've seen other things say like, oh, you can't put any like assets of any kind in it, right? So you can't like embed a bitmap or something into it somewhere for you to tile around things. Like everything has to be generated at runtime.
Yeah.
So maybe there'll be other limitations like that, but it's crazy because you'll watch you'll run this thing and it's got like a full soundtrack with like synthesis and all this stuff going on. You've got graphics usually playing that are, maybe not like, AAA like movie quality, but like what's being done is technically very impressive given the limitation, right? Things like full geometry calculations. Like one of my favorite demos I ever saw, and I'm going to get this wrong, but I feel like it was an even lower limit than that. And this dude made this scene that was like watching it felt like you were on like a cart in a mine shaft, but like you never really get around the corner.
Wow.
But yet the shape of the tunnel is kind of changing, and
Yeah.
it seems like there's lighting effects. But then after a while, your brain starts to realize, like, maybe there's like a loop to this. And then you realize, like, no, there's no loop. It's just like, it's very
Weird.
cleverly reusing some of the same pieces over and over and over again. And I'm just not smart enough to pick up on which, like, what are they? And the whole thing fits in some tiny little file, you know, and you're just like, that's insane. Like,
Yeah.
who came up with it? And just for fun, like, who does that?
Yeah.
But then, you know, like you said, then we sit around at our own party reading a book about synthesizers.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
On that note, it has been 30 minutes, just to let you know.
Okay. How much longer do you
It
want?
is 1:35.
All right.
Another 10 minutes or
I
so?
have a couple minutes, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I guess with that in mind, we'll start winding down. But yeah, we did things a little differently today. Just kind of having more of a conversation. We're both quite busy today, I think.
To be honest, too, like this is like conversation in general about, I guess, just like, you know, say what for whatever craft. Like for us, it's like we enjoy sound design, we enjoy writing and producing music. Like it's cool to know where that came from and kind of like what the pedigree that came before it is. Like this is what people had to do. Like for example, I was talking about having to bounce 4-track tape infinitely, you know, and it's like, can you imagine the kind of trash you could make, but can you also imagine the kind of beauty that could come from that?
Definitely.
Because of having to commit to things or whatever the end thing ends up being. It could even be something stupid and technical. Like it turns out that, you know, the summing of all these things inside of this tape machine just is maybe super saturated, and so everything you put through it has a certain character to it. And it's like, well, maybe that's artistically cool. I don't know.
Yeah, but when I mess with Logic, one of the hardest things with making music in there is the infinite possibilities and the fact I don't have to commit as heavily. I think that actually, in my case, detracts from my creativity because I like to see a certain amount of options and choose one. Chiptune has been a relief for me in terms of composition. It's a great starting point for me just because I'm so limited in sound design. I get a few options. I can make things. I can do certain things, you know, but then it really makes me focus on the thing I actually enjoy, which is the composition. And things more or less are going to work because just the fact that each sound doesn't take up much space of the frequency spectrum. They all kind of work in their own little area.
Well, and you mentioned a key thing earlier, which is a lot of times nothing's really playing at the same time as anything else. You just don't notice when you're listening to it.
Yeah, exactly. And mixes can get really muddy. You get down to when you get up to 8 tracks playing at once. Well, now you have to think of clever ways to make space for everything. Where that stuff just kind of inherently happens naturally with Chiptune because everything can only operate so much.
Right.
And one little, I found that to be relieving, but carrying those principles with me back to infinite possibilities, my approach has been completely different. Where now, instead of saying, well, I want this sound, so let me just make another channel, it's more like, well, how can I fit this sound within what the context of what I already have? Could this little melody fit with the same instrument? Does it even have to exist? Could I do like a ghost melody version of it where because of the harmonics of two already playing parts, I can create that illusion that part exists. You know, can I do that? That's what I've had to do in Chiptune.
Well, it's always a hard thing to, I guess, get your head to that point where you go, more possibility isn't always better.
It's the Baskin-Robbins problem.
Like we were talking a little bit before the stream started about what happens every time, you know, updates for major things come out, you know, and people want the latest thing and then they install it and they find out, oh, things are broken now.
All right.
Right. And it's like, it's kind of the whole, like you said, figuring out what you have that works and what the things it does and what they are and how to exploit them.
Yeah.
You're probably better off with that than you are like getting the new thing, you know?
Definitely.
And that's so hard to resist. We all love getting new stuff, man. It's so nice. It's so fun. It feels good.
When I feel that gear acquisition syndrome set in, I then say, well, what do I have? Have I reached the end of what I have yet? And so I have been, it's hard at first, but I've been forcing myself to, like, when I feel that, I think, is there something that I can do right now that will push my knowledge further? And I've learned that it actually helps in a lot of ways where I don't have that gear acquisition syndrome anymore. I have a lot of guitar pedals. I think that's a symptom of gear acquisition syndrome a little bit. What do you think of pedals?
Those are a little bit more like building blocks, though. You're not gonna get you try to get a take on me hating on some pedal collections.
No.
That's not gonna happen.
Not when we both subscribe to JHS.
Man.
Anyway, you want to just start wrapping up? I know you got to head out here soon.
Yeah, we can. There's something else I was gonna mention. I can't think of what it was now. But yeah, if you're watching this and you want to come down or be a part of this, please get a hold of us.
And if you're just down to even just come by, this, even though we make a lot of music on this stream for Sundays, and we haven't done the conversational side of things very much, with some exception. I'd like to also use the space just for people to get together and talk about music and talk about things. It doesn't always have to be making it. Although we can still do that, I'd like to think of this as more of like a, hey, we're here, we're making music, we're talking about music. If you're a musician, come hang out, let's talk or make music, This exists more as like a beacon, just to say, hey, we're here, come by and hang out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, and at the end of the day, like you said, we don't have to like create anything of value really other than, the time spent.
Yeah.
And that's in a sense that's why we're here, right? Cuz like we didn't really have time to like get together and do the usual like, oh, let's just BS about something for, you know what I mean? But
this kind of just having this conversation right now, I feel like it's a good time to just also say, if you're a musician in the area or just an artist in general, and you've obviously been writing, you've been producing stuff, you've learned things like along the way, like you've acquired knowledge that John and I haven't acquired because we have explored different pathways to get to where we're at today. It'd be really cool to hear from some of you in the area what you've done musically, things you've learned along the way. I love collecting knowledge and absorbing other people's experiences to acquire them, to utilize them for myself. So if you're like, maybe you've played with GarageBand for the last 10 years and you just learned all these cool tricks to exploit that technology, I want to hear about it. Like, that's really cool to me. So if you just want to come and talk about that, this would be a good space for that too, I think.
Yeah. And I also want to just say, like, we really appreciate everybody who's been riding with us.
Definitely.
Because we're looking up on, I mean, we're not there yet, right? But we're coming up on, 2 years?
Yeah.
Of doing this.
In January,
It's been fruitful. I mean,
definitely.
Not like I really ever had a benchmark for any of it, but people have, I think, enjoyed coming out, and I've certainly enjoyed the company and the music making in addition to just seeing something be created of any kind is always just rewarding, to be a part of.
The energy grows every time we get to meet new people and have them come through here. I think these times a lot of people need a place to be around people who like the same things as them. And in this area that we live in, there hasn't been a lot of good places to get with musicians or artists of that type and just like not have the expectations of being amazing. You don't have to be an amazing musician, but this is a place where, like, free of judgment, come as you are, tell us about yourself, teach us something. I mean, I don't know. I've asked some people, and some people have said, well, you and John seem like you know a lot, right?
Yeah, I don't know anything.
And we have spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff, and we're always learning, and we always want to learn more. But when we assess our knowledge, we don't look at it as like, look how amazingly intelligent I am with this stuff. We look how much we don't know yet. And that's why we say things like we're not that smart when it comes to this stuff. But it's more like we look at how much information is out there that we haven't yet been able to acquire. And so yeah, we know quite a bit. We know enough to fake it and to, you know, be convincing, but we're not elitists in this. We're pretty humble about our lack of knowledge and stuff. So
yeah, I would like to see, and you know, anyone feel comfortable, like from a skill level or knowledge standpoint, because dude, there was a time when I was trying to like figure out how to like, I don't know, like plug guitars into like old sound card, dude. Like you wouldn't believe the stuff that
things that just blind spots that you just didn't realize.
You don't know any better.
Yeah, you don't know any better.
So, and none of that's a problem. So we just wanna like you said, kind of just beacon up and say, hey, we're here. If you're looking for people to share this with, let us know. media@vibeunit.com.
Yeah, email us, and also check out our website. There's a lot of resources on there. There's pictures you can see, and also check out the mission and vision statements on there if you need to get more of a rounded out idea of what we're up to and what we're trying to accomplish. Again, just to condense it down, we're just here shouting into the darkness, looking for other people who are interested in similar stuff as us. So, I want to add you to the group. So,
cool.
So 95.
We'll be back.
Next week we'll be back.
96.
Hit us up this week. We want to play music next week.
Absolutely.
So hit us up.